see the world through other people's eyes. Now, empathy is a quality of character that can change the world.
Good morning and welcome to Artifact Live, episode 32 about storytelling and leadership. How are you? Nice to see you all again. If you're joining me for the first time, please stick your name and your location into the comments and we can see where you are tuning in from for across the world. Well, it's been an interesting week. Last week I spoke about storytelling and documentary, and then I went off and I've had 2 keynote speeches in the last 5 days. One for the financial services giant Protiviti, part of the Hay Group, another one for Japanese/Canadian pharmaceutical company called Takeda. I tell you what, I love telling stories, but it's pretty tiring when you're doing it on the keynote stage. Even if it's the virtual stage, it's pretty tiring. And I have to say, I am so grateful for the experience of doing this sort of thing every week for all these weeks, because it gets you much more confident at talking to a camera and at least trying to pretend that it's a person you're talking to rather than a Logitech HD10 80p camera. So last week, as I said, we spoke about documentary, and I hope some of you have followed up and had a look at the work of the likes of Werner Herzog. There's a lot there, and as I said last week, I'd love to unpack it a bit further, and we might even chat a bit about it today, but it's something that I think is, although it's more popular than it used to be, I still think there's opportunity to develop the documentary format, both for use in the sort of public information film side of things, like I spoke about last week, but also in the corporate world. I think there's much, much more opportunity there than many see to use the art that is filmmaking in the workplace. So I suspect we'll come back to that. So just one little bit of administration. If you are tuning in from my Facebook group, the Empathy Engine, and you make a comment, if you'd like your name to appear in the chat box, which you'll see when I pop your name up, if you put a chat in the chat box, please follow this little link. Now it's at the top of the Empathy Engine Facebook group. Just click it, click, and it doesn't do anything else apart from put your name on the screen. It's a bit of a pain, but at the moment, it's the workaround that the Restream team have come up with. They are working on it. Hopefully this will go away, but at the moment, we just have to do that. So if you don't mind doing that, that would be great. So this week, leadership. Well, I think this is the beginning of several deeper dives into the sort of the application of storytelling. And I started with leadership because it's kind of the meta. It's kind of the big thing that is very much spoken about on the likes of the LinkedIn platform. It's something there's increasing numbers of books being written about storytelling and leadership, but it's still fairly rare on education programs, MBA programs, which always astonishes me. But it's something that I think needs work. Has the definitive book been written yet? I don't think so. You never know, someone might have a go at writing one of those. But I think there is potential here. And the key thing, now, you know, I go on about this every week if you're a regular watcher, that stories have this ability to create empathy, both stories that you give and stories that you encourage and receive. And that empathy can really help you understand where other people are coming from. And I think if anything is clear, and not a lot is clear at the moment, let's be honest, in the sort of the post or almost post-COVID world, or you wouldn't know it given the horrendous things that are happening in India at the moment. It's awful. I think that storytelling's importance will definitely come up to the surface. And in fact, I also believe there's a very practical part here, because the stories that will be told about how individuals and corporations coped with the pandemic, I think will have a huge impact on their ability to attract and retain talent. So it's actually got a real important commercial purpose for organisations and individuals to be thinking about. So that's the sort of the preamble. The other thing is, I've had a haircut. Yes, it was 4.5 months in the making, and I was starting to look like some sort of character out of one of those Monty Python films. It was like like a bonnet I had on all the time. So it's a bit spikier, a bit more Teddy Boy look today. I think yeah, it's not too bad. But so yeah, I quite enjoyed having a haircut. So my guest today, well, I am delighted that I'm going to be joined by a chap called Paul Crick. Now, I met Paul here on the TEDx stage, and I think, is that running okay? Yeah, it is. Yeah. And Paul gave an absolutely inspiring TEDx talk about his views on leadership, and we'll come back to that. He calls it, I'll stick it on the screen, he calls it next level leadership. And it was a beguiling talk. It was beautifully presented, and it came at leadership from an angle that I personally thought was beautiful. I really liked it, and I think Paul and I will probably have a chat about it. But so I'd just like to introduce, without any further ado, I'm going to ask Paul to join me. Here you are, Paul. Good afternoon, almost, Paul. How are you?
Good afternoon, almost. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. If I said earlier, I'm a little bit sort of raw because I haven't had much sleep because of these dashed keynote speeches I've been doing, mate. So I am slightly frayed at the edges, I think is the best way to put it.
Well, we'll go gently then, yeah?
Thank you very much. So we met on the TEDx Red Dot, didn't we?
We did, yes.
Yeah. How did you feel that? What was that experience like for you?
Oh man, it was a whole range of emotions because it's so public. It was extremely nerve-wracking. So on the one hand, it was an immense amount of work.
Yes.
But I think I rewrote the script something like 30 times by the time I'd done it, and I was learning it off by heart. So what I did was I'd numbered the paragraphs, and then I literally recorded paragraph by paragraph, so I could record the paragraphs in any order, or rehearse the paragraphs in any order, so that if I lost my place, I could pick up at any point. Well, I'd sort of heard that as a tip through my work when I was working with musicians doing music performance anxiety. It's a brilliant tip. It works beautifully well.
It's quite a different experience doing one of these talks to doing a normal speech, isn't it?
I think it is. I think the thing I like about it, although not at the time, but looking back, is the constrained format. You know, you get this limited amount of time, which I think was for us was 17 minutes, and to cram all your ideas and sort of get a smooth trajectory of a story that sort of gets you into it. You don't waffle, you get the main points across, and you exit, and you do that flawlessly. That takes some doing, but the constraints really ramps up your ability to be creative in the process. Do you find that?
I found it. I've done 2 now, and the first one was to 3,500 people. And I actually found that one easier because it felt more like being on the keynote stage. You know, it felt more like what I'm used to. Whereas the second one was obviously a smaller thing, TEDx Telford. And I found it quite nerve-wracking. And of course, I did learn a lesson that day because I don't know if you remember, but I had some trouble with the technology. And I had to re-record a couple of my bits. And the next one I do, I'm not using any technology. I'm just not doing it. I'll use artifacts like I do on this show. You know, I won't use tech because I think now I'm almost. This is terrible to say, admitting this on air as it is, but I'm actually scared now. I don't trust the technology. You know, I've got to the point. Like, I mean, I watch some of my colleagues in the speaking world who have spent thousands of pounds on fancy studios and kit, and nearly every time I interview them, something breaks.
Right.
You know, and I just think that keep it simple, stupid is something that, you know, I've always suspected was the right way to do a talk. But now I'm pretty convinced until I get persuaded otherwise, mate. You know, maybe you can persuade me otherwise, but I think that's what's left me with that. You know, I don't think I need to be using tech as much as maybe I did in the past.
Well, you and I both come from a management consulting world, and we were always taught when we were doing presentations, particularly high profile ones, about the importance of backup. So you get scenarios where your presenting team would say, "I'm sorry, we've only got 10 minutes. Tell us what, give us a succinct 10 minutes."
Yes.
Or you get something which would be, "Well, I'm sorry, the projector doesn't work.
Yes.
Have you got any handouts?" So it's just all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
More manual, the better.
I think that is right, and I think it will continue to be right because we're human beings, and even I know you and I both share a fondness for this digital format, but I do think that the old phrase, palm to palm, or in a room together, it's electric. You're never going to be able to create that. I don't think, certainly not in the next 50 years using text. So
yeah, I agree.
So we're here to talk specifically about leadership. And when I first met you, and we only had fleeting glances, didn't we? Because it was quite a hectic schedule that day. And I had been ill, and so I never made the rehearsals. I'd had pneumonia in the lead up to the TEDx. So I'd been in my bed. That's why I wasn't at any of the rehearsal sessions. And but your topic, as I mentioned in the outline, this next level leadership, really appealed to me. Do you mind giving us a feel for that, Paul? Could you give us a sort of idea what you mean by next level leadership?
Well, it came from a simple idea, which was when I used to work for IBM, and when I was working with them, I did a lot of the what would be called soft skills training courses, but taking people out of being experts into their first leadership role. So it was all about, it's that expression, "What got you here won't get you there," which is a Dr. Marshall Goldsmith phrase. And it was really about teaching them. So a good friend of mine, Keith Burgess, was kind enough to invite me in to sort of develop my chops of teaching, training, and learning this. And I did it for about 3 or 4 years.
Yeah.
And just got this real sense of what we were teaching wasn't quite it. It was a great event. There was great content, but it was almost like you kicked a wet sponge. You know what happens when you kick a wet sponge? It changes shape for a while, but then eventually it sort of goes back into the shape it was. So that struck me that something's not quite right. And as I started to dig into it, some of the stats made me explore that avenue of thinking a bit more. So, for example, in 2019, we spent globally 350 billion. That's billion with a B. On leadership development of some form or another, whether that's sending people externally, it's training people with high potentials. And yet most people only survived 14 months from being named in their post to actually leaving the post. That's the first thing. And second of all, look where we are. You have to look at it and say, well, if we're spending that much money, it doesn't take much to look at that and say something's broken. Something's, by whatever yardstick you choose to measure it, something's not right. Yeah. So I was curious as to what that was all about and why and what it was. And I guess, that's where it came from. And I was trying to tell this story, which was about leadership's actually quite, we overcomplicate it. Today I talk about it, and I don't mean to be facetious, particularly to anyone who's watching, who is a leadership development, in that world. But if you accept something's not right, then you have to say, well, there's a good parallel with the diet industry. The diet industry is a multi-billion global industry. And yet, if you look at levels of obesity and diabetes and poor health as a result of that, again, you have to say something's broken. So there's kind of like this parallel. And the conclusion the sort of idea I've got hold of at the moment is, well, the best diet in the world, frankly, is move more and eat less.
Yes.
It's that simple. It at one level, it isn't in other ways. There's all sorts of, it's very general, very sweeping. There's all sorts of things that complicate that, from, various illnesses that people can't help. The availability of a nutritional source of food, the cost of feeding yourself on quality food as opposed to, perhaps more generic merchandise goods. So I appreciate that's not simplistic. But you could argue that leadership could be simply boiled down to a similar equation, which says be nice to yourself and be nice to other people. Again, it's not that simple. But it's a good pattern interrupt for thinking that seems to, and it's one of the advantages of coming to it late rather than being steeped in it for 20 years, is you kind of see that. You step back and you look at it and you say, something's not really there. So that's really what the talk was about. And then it was saying, well, the age of heroic leadership doesn't exist. People, that hasn't worked. People donning underpants on the outside of their suit or their business suit worked at some point, but doesn't work now. The world is more complicated. We're faced with a lot more problems that have much more transparency, and therefore simply being a hero doesn't work. The idea of leader and followership bothers me too, because what we really need is interdependence that says, at its very simplest level, you're great at these things, you go do those. I'm great at these things, I'm rubbish at these things. Is there who's in the room that can help make up the gap so that we can move together to achieve a common outcome for the betterment of ourselves and society? So it's really that story that says, something's broken, leadership's simpler than it is, and actually there are some basic principles which have become sort of the bedrock of what I'm doing with my own business around. So the be nice to yourself and other people is I've expressed in John F. Kennedy's phrase, which was be a rising tide. The idea that if a rising tide lifts all boats. So be part of the rising tide and help other people up wherever they are, whatever they've done, whatever you think they deserve. Everybody deserves to be lifted. Everybody deserves a meaningful and joyful life. Yes. So find ways to do that in really small ways every day. The next level bit comes from martial arts that I took up 3 years ago. So huge shout out to Shoot Academy here in Nottinghamshire, where I train. They have the standard belt system, which we're perhaps familiar with, where you go from white to yellow to orange to green to blue to brown to black. Yeah. But what Shoot Academy have done is beautiful, because you earn little stripes in between that create tiny steps in between. So you're always progressing along that journey. And it doesn't matter whether you've been doing it for 30 years and you're a 7th Dan black belt, or it's your first lesson as a white belt. The whole dojo works to say, right, how do we help you up to the next level? Because if we don't get you there, we failed. And I think that's beautiful. And then the last idea was simply, and I've forgotten which book I read it in, but it was this beautiful distinction between achievement and accomplishment that really struck me, that said, and again, I don't want to belittle some of the achievements I'm going to talk about, because to do them is just astonishing. If you've rowed the Atlantic solo and you've broken the world record, as Kiko Matthew has, and you raised £100,000 for King's College Hospital brain unit as in part, that's a phenomenal achievement. That's incredible, but it's only achievement. If you've climbed Everest up the wrong way without oxygen and naked, that's not only very foolhardy, but it's also a very brave achievement. It is astonishing to have done anything like that. And lastly, a gold medal at the Olympics. That's a lifetime of effort's gone into that, and to produce that. But the point was, it's only an achievement, because accomplishment comes when you put that in service of someone else to say, you know what, you can do something like that too. You may have been told all your life that you're not enough, or this is wrong, or you've got this weakness. But the truth is, everyone has a strength. And the work I'm trying to do is to figure out, instead of putting a square peg in a round hole, let's find a square peg and a square hole, because they fit. Yes. And then find out what the light is within inside you, to then be able to shine that and amplify that into the world, because it's what the world needs right now. It's what the world has always needed, frankly. So how do we do that? How do we find that? How do we change our perceptions of, here's 30 competencies you must have as a leader, and by the way, you're weak on 10 of them. You just shoot people down straight away. Yes. As opposed to saying, okay, these are the strengths. What do you love to do? What is it that, if we could do it, would light you up every day? And it doesn't matter if you're a sweet street sweeper or you're a CEO. If it lights you up, you can't lie about that. you can't not inspire people in that way. So that's what I was trying to get over in the TED talk. This idea of doing that, you know.
Yes, lovely. I mean, it's nice to hear you talking in a bit more detail about it, because obviously in 17 minutes you can only touch on it. So it's quite.
Yeah,
You probably spoke there almost as long as you did for your TEDx, and that's just a touch
almost.
on
Yeah.
the edge of it. Yeah, it's amazing.
Hopefully it didn't ramble.
No, it didn't at all. We've got a question for you here from Doug.
Hello,
He's
Doug.
asking, is one of the issues that a masculine culture of unwavering strength has become a core of leadership, and thus leaders find it difficult to admit their vulnerabilities?
That is a fantastic question, and a real avenue I'm exploring right now. I think that's some of it. I think this idea of power over as well, which typically comes from a historic masculine culture. And again, it's easy to apply these labels and say, well, it applies to all men, and it doesn't. But yes, but what's interesting is if you look at, so I've been digging into emotional intelligence, because again, when I've been teaching emotional intelligence, and mea culpa, I've taught it this way. It's almost like you get the flip chart out and you draw a 2x2 matrix in classic MBA style. You go, right, self, social. And you explain the ideas about self-regulation and regulation in a social environment. And then you send everyone off to go and do go and do a role play, which they do very dutifully, and they come back and then you say, okay, so what worked well? What do you understand? What have you got questions about? And you answer all that. And then you get to the end, you go, so any more questions? And then for a little joke, you say, you must be hungry. It's close to lunchtime. Who's ready for lunch? Right, let's go to lunch. And sure enough, we've all graduated in emotional intelligence.
Yes.
There's something missing from that, which works at the level of interpersonal neurobiology. And it's an area that I'm starting to say more and more about, because as you dive into it, personality doesn't scale, biology does. Is a beautiful phrase by Stephen Kotter.
Yeah.
And it's this idea of how we have this constant dance of relax or defend and attack, or relax and attack, which is as natural as breathing. In fact, it is what happens when we breathe. And I think historically, masculine culture has been the case of surviving. This is my learned pattern of behavior, to survive and to have meaning and place in the world. I'm happy to report, I think I'm seeing, or maybe I'm just reading the right articles. I think I'm seeing a zeitgeist that says, this needs to change. We need to get away from gender equality, because again, the idea of a man and a woman being equal is ridiculous. And I know that. And let me explain. A better metaphor is balance. You bring men and women into balance, and again, applying the strengths of both. And I don't mean, men are barefoot and pregnant in the kitchen, and women are in the C-suite. I mean, there is a balance of strengths, and it's that exploration. So I've sort of come down to the idea that culture is conversation, and it's real time, it's concurrent, it's in parallel, but it has an effect and an impact neurobiologically. And we don't acknowledge that. We just go, it's emotional intelligence, and then we work at a very logical and skulled place, which says, everything's in our brain and our head, and anything else, anything below the neck, it doesn't exist. And yet it's probably the most important part of how we communicate and how we interact with each other.
I mean, I guess the trouble with the current dialogue, it's not dialogue, is it? It's dogma, is that it's coming from a them and us type perspective all the time.
It seems to be.
And it's not productive. It's just creating, I think, more difference, which is exactly what they aspire not to have on all parties. Not. I'm not choosing a side here, even the word side, I'm not comfortable saying it. So we're definitely on the same page there, and it's something that. And weirdly, I was talking about this yesterday. I think we're in an interim position. The denial of the past, I think, is foolhardy. I don't think that serves any. It's worth exploring, but not denying. And I think what we do now is I think the baton is changing. Is moving to the next. I mean, one of the most overused phrases in the leadership speak is the word paradigm, and particularly paradigm shift. I mean, it's used at bollocks. I mean, it's just used in the most inappropriate places because what it means is a massive non-returning shift. Putting a new Oracle system into your company is not a frigging paradigm shift.
No.
And unfortunately, organisations don't understand that. And I think but I think the key thing is it's a bit, and I know it's a bit trite, and I've actually got my butterfly up here. When a cocoon goes to a butterfly, it can never go backwards. There's a thing called atavism in biology. If you've ever heard about atavism, which is like reverse evolution, but you can now. So there is sometimes, you can go backwards in evolutionary traits and how they're expressed, but in the biological systems, as you just said, I mean, in the middle between the pupae and the butterfly, it's a mess. It's all reorganizing, and the chromosomes are everywhere.
Well, it's a liquid, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right, and that's kind of where we are. Actually, that's a good metaphor for it. We're in a liquid state. We're not in that clear state, and I think all parties are very guilty of forgetting that, and because you make mistakes when you're in these sorts of states, you don't get it right all the time, and I get frustrated, and I think leaders are very guilty of this, that they struggle not to change them. They don't want to change their minds, or appear to change their minds. If you change your mind in the scientific world, you get a Nobel Prize for it. But in the leadership domain, it's seen as a weakness, and I just think it's stupid. I'm being very blunt this morning. That's because I've had no sleep. I think it's just bloody stupid, Paul.
Yeah, really stupid. No, I'm in agreement with you. I find there's an interesting disconnect in that we will observe and we will praise, these finite arenas of sport and the military world, and yet we won't adopt any of the practices. So, in sport, the idea of recovery. Well, in business, we tend to generally wear a busyness badge where the honor is how long can you hang your jacket on the back of the seat for. And the one that turns the light off wins. And that's beginning to change, and it has had to change because we've gone to this hybrid working environment where we've got kids and spouses and washing up and daily duties, but it's all in there. We can't get away from it now. So we're having to adjust. So I think it's interesting that on the one hand we say, it's almost like we talk a good game. Yes. But it's that classic thing in consulting. Have you got any quick wins? People say to me, have you got any quick wins? Can you really help? I'm really stressed. I go, yeah, breathe. Yeah. And they go, no. Have you got any quick wins? It's almost like, yeah, breathe. Yes. What do you mean? Well, for 10 minutes a day. Oh, I haven't got 10 minutes a day. I'm just too busy. It's like, oh, come on.
Yeah. What are you doing? Yeah.
And so it's easy to chuck rocks. Changing habits is not something we do naturally. So it would be very easy to pass over that, but we don't entertain that enough. This research is showing, being busy, working hard all the time is actually detrimental. There's an HBR article out this month. That talks about that, but there's hundreds of studies that confirm it, and it's kind of like, well, why are you still playing that game?
Yes.
And
it is hopeful though, isn't it, that we're now talking like this? I mean, 10 years ago, if we did this conversation in the bar about IBM and KPMG, can you imagine the amount of abuse would have got?
I'd be sacked.
Yeah, I mean, it would never have worked, mate. I mean, no way.
That force curve.
Can you sell it on? God.
No, it wouldn't have gone well. It wouldn't have gone down well.
So at that point, I'd just like to remind everybody what we're doing today. This is ARTEFACTLive, and my name is Scott MacArthur, and what I am passionate about is about the art and the science of storytelling. And I've really enjoyed that half hour with Paul so far, because he's given us a sort of a way into thinking about a really difficult subject like leadership, and to think about it in a different way. And when he comes back, I'm going to ask him to show us his artifact. But just before I do that, I'd like to tell you about something else that I'm working on. Starting in a couple of weeks' time, I'm now doing the very last Thursday of every month, I'm going to be doing a talk on the Funzing platform. It doesn't matter if you don't know what funding is. It's basically a platform where people like me can, present to audiences and, give them a feel for, what their interests are and what they've been up to. And I'm going to do that. And on the first one's on the 27th of May. And at that, I'm actually going to, for the first time, really go through why I chose the word artifact as the brand for this show. And it won't surprise you, I'm going to be talking about the two words art and fact and why it's important to consider those. But for each of the letters, like a true consultant, Paul, I'm going to be looking at how the word artifact is broken down to form a little model. So if you'd like to support my work by coming along, or to learn more about my view on how to create your own stories, whether it's in the leadership or the personal domain, please join me at one of those events. It's only 13 quid for a ticket, so it's fairly straightforward. I'll be using this platform, probably beaming it through Zoom, so it should be fairly straightforward for everybody. And one of the things that I will definitely be talking about, and you've heard me talking about this before, is about becoming an archaeologist of your own life. And that's why I've asked people like Paul to come on the show and share their artifacts. So, Paul, would you mind sharing the artifact you brought along with us with you today with the viewers, please?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it is always a pleasure to have an excuse to do this. So this is my artifact. This is an Ibanez Gem Junior.
Wow. That's a thing of beauty, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah.
I got it in 2004. It's a bit dusty. It needs a good clean. I got it in 2000. So huge Steve Vai fan. A ridiculous Steve Vai fan. I mean, followed him all over Europe. Ridiculous. Oh, right. God, yeah. Spent a fortune. Seeing all the important performances. And being a musician, I'm recovering classical musician is the way I like to bill it. I learned piano from probably when I was 3, did my grade 7 at 12, and then saw Led Zeppelin at about 13 and went, oh, that's what I want to do.
You saw Led Zeppelin?
No, saw Led Zeppelin passed around the classroom. All my mates were into hard rock, and because I wanted to fit in, I did the same. But wanted to learn guitar because it just looked way cooler than whatever. So, and as is always the way, it's like, well, if your hero's doing it, then you'll become just like your hero if you buy the same instruments. And that was the logic for buying it.
Right, let's just look at Steve Vai again. Yeah, there's a bit of you there, isn't there?
A little bit, yeah. I too had my haircut today, so yeah.
And music's played quite a big part in your post IBM life as well, hasn't it?
It's always been an important part on the side. The excuse to go. I do a charity gig once a year, which is fantastic fun. We're raising money on a golf day, and then I play piano in the evening over dinner, and I just love doing it. But interestingly, it was the reason it's part of the story. The reason I brought it along was it actually relates to leadership, and it does in so many ways. But the story I want to tell you is this was the guitar I took to the London International Music Show in 2009, and that year, guess who was giving a masterclass? And guess who had a ticket? And the deal was he did a draw. He did a raffle draw. Basically, pick your ticket, and if your ticket came out of the hat, you could go and play with Steve Vai for 2 minutes.
Good Lord!
And it was one of those things. So everybody knows I used to be terrified of playing in public, and I'm not just talking like shut down. I'm talking quivering, no control over my hands. So as I qualified towards where I am in the coaching world, this kind of fascinated me as to why this was the case. Right. And I thought, right, it's fear. That's what it is. It's fear. I'm going on a big research project now with all the studies I'm doing to figure out how to conquer fear.
Right.
So I did the Tony Robbins thing and did the firewalk. I've done several of those, which is just great fun, because everyone says, "Oh, I'm doing a triathlon to raise money for the whatever," and I go, "Yeah, I'm going to walk 30 feet across fire, and it's going to take me 30 seconds." Yeah. But it's terrifying if you haven't done it before. So I've done that. The other thing I've done is I did a thing called a leap of faith, and a leap of faith is effectively learning to do a stunt jump off the equivalent of a third-story building. So you're on the third story, and literally you jump off in an inverted crucifix and land on an inflatable mat.
Oh my goodness!
So I thought, okay, and then I did a tandem jump out of a parachute at 13,000 feet for charity, and I thought, well, by the time I got to the end of it, when you get time to reflect, you kind of go, I think I've got the fear thing wired. What's this about? What's this? Why can't you play?
Yes.
And that's where I discovered neurobiology and the role of the autonomic nervous system and polyvagal theory and how it relates to emotional intelligence. And therefore, Steve Jobs says, you make sense of your life by joining the dots backwards. You kind of go, oh, right, yeah, I see how I do this. Anyway, back to London International Music Festival. So Steve started, he's done all this stuff, and he says, right, it's time to play. And everyone sits up in the chairs. And my inner fanboy is sort of sat there going, pick me. Don't pick me.
Yeah.
And he picked out the first, he was going to pick out 6 tickets, got 6 tickets, read the numbers, and sure enough, mine wasn't one of them. And I was a bit bummed out, to be honest. I was kind of like, I traveled all this way. I really wanted to play with him just to know what it felt like to stand next to him and play, even if it was one note.
Yes.
And then he pipes up and he says, nah, that's not enough. Who else wants to play? And before I knew what was happening, my inner fanboy had stood up and shouted, I'll play, Steve. He went, great, stand over there.
Brilliant.
Like, oh, crap.
Careful what you wish for.
No kidding.
Yeah.
So so the cue, so basically you played 32 bars over a backing track, and it was a call and answer thing, and then you made a noise together, and that was it. So thank you very much. And then joined the queue at the end of it all to sit down and talk to him for 2 minutes and sign an autograph or whatever.
Really? So
this was my guitar I took with me. And what I learned was all that training of jumping off out of planes and walking across fire was actually quite useful. Yes. And for about a minute, I did really well.
Brilliant.
I kept with him. I played sensible, nothing flash, but he called, I responded. It sounded okay-ish. And then he went off on one for the last, let's make a noise together. And I just went. Surprisingly, he was a lot better than I was at playing the guitar, was the thing I took away from it. But that was a great experience. But it's funny how an object like this, has so many stories related to it, because I can always go back to, that story is part of a book I'm writing right now. It's one of the chapters that really sort of sets the scene of, how to dive into neurobiology in a way that's kind of fun. Yes. And people can kind of relate to. So that's the artifact.
Very good. That was lovely. And I hope you've got pictures of that meeting, have you?
I've got the picture of the meeting where he sat in a lotus position on a table talking to me. Because the thing, I don't know if you get this, but when you follow someone so closely, the thing you forget is you know way more about them than they know about you. So if you say things like, so Steve, how's the honey crop? How's the honey crop this year? You can talk about that. You talk about something else that's really personal, and he sort of does the double take. It's like, how do you know that? How do you know my inside leg measurement? But it's just it's a fan thing. So
I remember I had a wobble about. I mean, my big musical hero is Neil Peart. The drummer from Rush, and he's also, I think, one of the great sort of music philosophers as well. And I wrote him a letter, and I sent him a book. It was a book about walking in Scotland, and it wasn't a popular book. It was a self-published book by someone that I actually knew. but it's a beautiful book. So I sent Neil it. Never expected any response, but he wrote back to me. And I remember, like a little boy, I mean, this is only, I mean, he died, 2 years ago now? And so this was only about 5 years ago.
Okay.
And I remember getting this letter, from Canada, and I'm thinking, that's from Neil Peart. And I thought, I'll be from his management company or something, but it wasn't. It was from Neil Peart, and I was just absolutely blown away by it. I get it. I can definitely resonate with you on the fan thing. I think it's very interesting. But it's nice that you've linked that to leadership. I mean, I find a lot of the time with I call it popcorn, the Tony Robbins of this world. I'm not a big fan.
No,
because I think he abuses people with the prices of his events that will never attain what he promises them, and I think it's fundamentally an abuse often. So I'm not a huge fan of that. But I think the thing that's often missing is the links that he doesn't make. And a lot of these people don't make the links, and it's one of the other. Oftentimes, I have, when I hear sportsmen speaking or sportswomen speaking, they can't make the link because they've never made the link between sport and business. And oftentimes I get just popcorn. It's quite interesting in the moment, but then it just doesn't give you any nutrition. And you've just given us a good example of the nutrition factor that can be built in to these I think it's quite blunt, but I find it quite vacuous a lot of the time. So thank you for that. I mean, but can you build a little bit when we're coming? Oh goodness, we're nearly over time already. I told you it would be easy to do 45 minutes.
You guide me. Tell me you can do this anytime.
Yeah, well, I might have to on myself, but there's another thing that I'd like us to just explore before we finish. This idea of storytelling and leadership. Why is it not everywhere? I just don't see it. Now, obviously it's good for me because I've got a niche, it's a nice little niche for me to be focused on, but it doesn't seem to have it didn't have the power that I think it should have because stories can change the world. Stories do change the world, but companies are really poor at it. Have you any views on that? Is it back to where we started when we were talking about consulting, or any perspective on that, Paul? I'm sorry I didn't prime you for that question, but it seems to be a good question to ask you.
I was very, very lucky. I got to go on a course at IBM taught by Jeremy Waite. Jeremy is one of those guys that plays the evangelical role of talking about software, and he'd worked for Salesforce and for Facebook, and he'd worked for Adobe. So coming into IBM, that was a big draw.
Yeah.
But his thing is he dissects how stories are told. So he really is, like you, one of the experts about, so he pulled apart Nancy Duarte's, how to structure the flow and the pace of a talk, how to use things called cold opens, which if you watch Saturday Night Live, always starts with a cold open, which is some kind of sketch that's vaguely related to the show, and then it takes you into the main topic. The idea of using nested loops, which Billy Connolly was an absolute master at, even though his wife would claim, oh, well, it's just a rant. I'm sure it's not. I'm sure he knows exactly what he's doing. And to go through that, to be taught, it actually set me up to do the TED Talk, to really think about analyzing that. And, if you look at, and again, it comes back down to neurobiology and neurochemistry. We get shots of dopamine, we get shots of serotonin and oxytocin, and you can tell stories. You can actually manipulate stories to do that and be manipulative. Jeremy didn't come from that point of view. It was the art of using language and understanding how language is used to create a better story. And he was telling me, we caught up, a couple of months ago, and just a chit chat, and he was telling me he'd won a $300 million clear deal with a client.
Whoa, my goodness!
And they went back to find out, what was it that made the difference? And you know the answer?
Yeah,
the story that you told.
Brilliant.
So the financial case is absolutely compelling for doing this. If I point you to his podcast, and some of the materials he's got are well worth a listen. But particularly his references to the speech writers that he refers to about how they do put campaigns together, how they try to change the world through ideas and through the art of speech. And as I alluded to earlier, the thing that the penny finally dropped when I read a book called The Heart of Trauma by Dr. Bonnie Badnock, which says everybody's running around saying, "Oh, why does therapy work? Why does coaching work?" And then they're coming up with all these studies, and people don't realize it works because of our innate neurobiology. In that there is no such thing as a single brain. Yes. We can only ever co-create our experience.
What does that mean?
So you listening to me is creating pictures and responses in your neurobiology. Some of it you'll agree with, some of it you'll dispute, some of it and when you may withdraw from, you may go inside, you may go, "Where's my mobile phone? I'm not interested in this. It doesn't resonate with me." But other things, you may be hanging on the edge of your seat, and that's all to do with how you respond to what I'm saying. But the things you're saying to me are co-creating my experience. I'm thinking, is this going in the right direction? Am I waffling too much? Am I hitting some points that is interesting for the audience that's watching it? Am I really trying to make that link between the artifact, leadership, and storytelling? So that co-creates that experience on a one-to-one. But think about that in an organizational setting. If you accept that conversation creates that neurobiological chain reaction between two people, then it creates a concurrent and parallel chain reaction across the whole organizations. Not only that, it's across organizations and it's across cultures and it's intergenerational. And once there was a sudden seeing things through a different lens. And because we use the T word, the trauma word, everybody sort of backs off and goes, "Oh, don't want to talk about that." All the solicitors get twitchy, all the HR people get even twitchier. And I get it. I absolutely get it, and why that would be the case. But it's because they don't understand what's going on at a neurobiological level, which is perfectly natural. It's how we were wired to function. Our job is to keep ourselves safe and alive and propagate our genes through time.
Yes, absolutely. I tell you what, I mean, if you think about everyone, just think about what we've spoken about. We've spoken about Steve Vai, heavy rock guitar player. We've spoken about neurobiology. We've spoken about leadership. We've spoken about, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that beautifully shows that, I mean, I talk often about cognitive diversity, as you probably heard me speak about, mate, but I think that what you've said today is a great example of how one shouldn't be limited. As I think I used to be myself, to I would only tell corporate stories in the corporate world. I wouldn't bring in my stories about trauma, as you mentioned, or about good experiences in my personal life or whatever. But I do think we're getting to a point where we can, as long as we're willing to be vulnerable, and as long as we've got that brave, and again, you touched on that with your completely ridiculous things like jumping out of planes, you silly man. But but I think you've linked that beautifully, and I'll compliment you on that. I think that was really well done, how you brought those threads together. So thank you very much. So I'm afraid we're going to have to come to a close. If people want to get hold of you, where would be the best place for them to do that?
Let's make it easy. You'll find me on LinkedIn. Just send me a direct message. I'll happily chat further if that's something you'd like to do.
Fantastic. And of course, I will tag you on the video when we bring the video out.
Great, thank you.
It's been a pleasure talking to you. I knew it would be. And I'm very intrigued by the piece you have on trauma. And I think maybe if you're willing and able, I'd like to invite you back on again to talk about that, because I think I've had conversations with others about it. But I think, again, this cognitive diversity, or this cognitive cognitively diverse mindset that you've demonstrated is one I'd like to push a bit further on that specific topic, Paul, if that would be something you'd be interested in doing. Yeah, I'll put you on the spot. Don't feel
no. If I very much would love to, if that's helpful. Yeah.
Fine, well, thank you ever so much, and I hope you've enjoyed being on Artefact Live. Thank you. Thanks. Well, I hope you've enjoyed that. I mean, I have. I think it was a terrific conversation, and one that I've learned a bit. I didn't know all those things about my guest, but it was. I mean, I had inklings about his music and things like that, and we share some common taste with music. But I didn't know that he was using it at that level, and I think it was really interesting. So, thank you very much, Paul. Now, as you heard me say last week, it's quite a coincidence that Paul mentioned Nancy Duarte, because Nancy has agreed to come on the show. So I'm working on a date with her. She is, I think she's the best, certainly the best presentation coach on the planet. And some of the work she's done is just out of this world. So I can't wait to have her on the show. Likewise with Professor Robin Dunbar, I'm working on him. I had a chat with him a couple of days ago. So hopefully we're going to get a date in the diary for them coming on the show as well. But I'll tell you what, they're going to have to do well to beat the level of the depth of knowledge that Paul just demonstrated. I thought that was quite fantastic. So I hope you've enjoyed the show this week. And as always, I'd like to end with a call to action. And that call to action is, look out for stories this week. You may just have seen one that you can use when you go back to your life, when you switch off the computer and you go into the next meeting on Zoom, or you go into a face-to-face meeting, hopefully, after this COVID pandemic ends. Because you know what? Those stories really can change the world. Those stories really can make the world a better place. Thank you very much for tuning in to Artefact Live, the art and science of storytelling. My name is Scott MacArthur, and I look forward to seeing you next week.